So here we are, sharing secrets of the soil with me, your host, Regen Ray. Hello, soil lovers, and welcome to another episode of Secrets of the Soil. I'm your host, Regen Ray, and I am so excited to dig deeper today with our new soil lover, Peter. Welcome to the call.
Thanks so much, Ray. And hello to all the soil lovers out there. Really happy and excited to be here today.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Peter. I know that you've got an amazing product and a whole school of thoughts around composting and worm farms and your product. So I'll let you share with our soil lovers what you're all about.
Thank you, Ray. So our product is called the Subpod, and it's an underground worm farm that takes the smells, mess, and pests out of composting. And I don't really think I want to sit here and talk about the product itself, but more about the story of how we got there, because it is a pretty interesting story. It's a classic startup story. We started here in Byron Bay in a shed with a few of us with the idea of how do we make composting easy? And so we started a Kickstarter, and that started to pick up a bit of momentum. And we had people from the US back us, and Australia and parts of Europe. And from there, we were able to create the first prototypes and the first designs of Subpod. And for anybody out there who wants a visual, it's like a really big box, like a big esky almost, with hundreds and hundreds of holes in there and some ventilation at the top. And so you dig this, put it in the ground. It's a vermicompost system, and the worms live in their natural environment there. So they can eat faster and they can breed faster, and it just makes composting a whole lot simpler. I think what we learned during this process, though, was, I'd love to dive into this a bit more, it's the community factor, which we found out very quickly that it wasn't just providing people with a really easy way to compost. It was, wait, this is so much more. This is a movement. This is a community. And when people feel empowered to compost, it can literally change their lives. And we've had so many great stories of that. Incredible stories of people just teaching their kids how to compost for the first time and teaching their neighbors and schools. So yeah, lots to share there.
Love that. And I noticed that you mentioned in your bio something about making compost sexy. Define that. What does it look like?
Making compost sexy. It's something that I go to sleep with every night. Like, that question, how do I make composting sexy? And I suppose that came to me when I was reading, it's behind me somewhere, Kiss the Ground, probably about when it came out 5-6 years ago. There was a mention of an article by John Crawford, who's a professor at the University of Sydney, and he wrote this article named "What Would Happen If Soils Ran Out?" And he went through the issues and really the problems of why aren't we addressing the catastrophe of soil degradation. And he said, well, we don't find soil sexy. I sat with that. I was like, wow, why is that? And so much has changed since then. Of course, you're now doing a podcast about soils and calling out soil lovers. Like, perhaps that wouldn't be like that 10 years ago. No. And so when I think about making soil sexy, a big part of my role as community manager is spending time on social media. And of course, social media is full of people trying to take the best photo of themselves. Maybe a bit too many photos of women in yoga pants and men and topless men. And so I wanted to put soil into that. Like, how do we actually get these people who are really excited about using Instagram, but get soil and gardening and composting in the process? And that's my mission. Yeah.
I love that. What a great mission. And I'm glad that you've shared that you go to bed thinking about that. And I agree, for too long, soil's been treated like dirt. It's been forgotten about. And, I am very proud to call our community soil lovers and really embrace that soil enthusiasm. And, my catchphrase is to dig deeper and get our hands dirty. We've lived in this world of like germs and wash your hands. And unfortunately, I feel like that is not a step in the right direction. So I'm all here for your motto of making it sexy. So good stuff. And you've spoken a lot about community, and that's near and dear to my heart as well. And hanging out with Farming Secrets and Helen and Hugo, they've always spoken about how, the rural communities have kind of broken apart. And that's what's really caused a lot of these farmers to be isolated and out of touch with their local community. And, the shops close down and they become a bit ghost towny. So I love anyone who's working on community. And you've mentioned that, Subpod has got a strong community. Can you share a little bit more about like why community is so important and how your product achieved that?
Sure. So, well, when we look at nature, I'm sure the soil lovers understand this. So when you look at the soil itself, it works in an ecosystem, and the larger the diversity, the more resilience we have. And so you looking in that model, that's kind of what we try to recreate there. And I think any community out there would try to recreate. For us, it was about creating another platform outside of Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, which is called the Grow Hub. And so this is a community which is organized by us. We have almost all of our staff on there answering questions, and we have people who are just putting up anything they're curious about, composting, gardening wise. And that created a separate space that people can go on there. They can get their questions answered. They can have a yarn. They can meet up with other people that have a Subpod or are just gardening locally. So that space was really important. But beyond that, we have over 10 people that will share something about Subpod and composting on our social channels every day. And there's a few reasons for that, but the main factor is that we've managed to create really good brand awareness with Subpod and giving you a feeling of curiosity and empowerment and fun. There's so many messages when it comes to climate change and doing good for the environment, which can invoke fear. Well, we're trying to change that and putting the fun back in it. Where's the excitement? Like I like to think about the carrot on the stick. When we've got a carrot on the stick, which is fun and curious, we tend to follow it, right? But as soon as you remove it and you're just maybe whipping the donkey with fear, then we go around as humans as we're not really sure what to do. So that's one of the big things we try to bring into all of our Subpod content is fun, curiosity, empowerment.
I love that. Some very powerful words there. And even like the fact that your community, coming from marketing, we call this user-generated content, where the community is creating the content, they're asking the questions, they're sharing the photos. That's a very hard thing to achieve. And especially when you're trying to build that community, it can sit out of sight, out of mind. So kudos to you for creating such a strong connection to your community where they feel open and that space to share and be vulnerable and put those photos up and start conversations and questions. And then that gives others the confidence that they can do the same. And that safe space is really, really important in today because people are confused. They don't know where to turn. They don't know who their support is. They look out the window and it seems a little bit upside down. So if we can find that common ground of composting and worms and sexy soils, it's awesome.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ray. I think it's a snowball effect as well. It's like once we reach that critical mass and you see enough people in there sharing, like all it takes is a group and for it to grow. So however, I suppose for people out there that are in a similar situation, I know Farming Secrets, you guys have built an amazing community too as well. It's like, how do we get those initial people excited and bring them on and keep them engaged and communicate with them just like they're our friends? And from there, it can grow and they can start to engage with other new people.
Absolutely. And that whole friendship and the relationship, social media has put a lot of people feeling a bit more disconnected, even though we're connected with so many more people. And I think a lot of people have a lot of shallow relationships, but when you find a common interest like this, it adds that level of depth, and yeah, it's authentic. And people say, well, how can you have a true relationship with someone online on the other side of the world? And I'll argue and say maybe sometimes those relationships are deeper than your neighbor next door.
It's so true. I think sometimes we can kind of cut the surface and get straight to the root of what really sparks us. And I have a couple of relationships with people in the US that use the Subpod during winter because, of course, it doesn't get freezing cold here. We have a woman, Giordana, who has the Instagram Happy Composter, and she's had Subpod for 2 years in Maryland, and she's just experimented. She's just been a really atypical woman that cares about climate change, that has a son and wanted to start composting. And so she went through this entire process with her and her husband come winter. And I remember just talking to her about it. I was like, try a cold frame, like see how it goes. And she did the research, bought a cold frame, and we now recommend that to all our other customers who want one. So it's just like the curiosity again and the willingness to just try something really helped her, and it helped us in the process. It's this give-take relationship.
Crowdsourcing the solution. I love it. And
Yeah.
I think that's near and dear to you if you've turned to crowdsourcing platforms to launch your product. I want to go a little bit into that because I know that there's a lot of farmers who and soil lovers who want to start enterprises and they're a bit unsure. You know, they think it's marketing and bringing people onto their farm and all these other moving parts. And it kind of goes on the one day, maybe it's a bit too hard bucket list. So can you share any wisdom with listeners, whether they be soil lovers or farmers, and even myself, like where do you get the confidence to do a Kickstarter, and how did that work for you?
So just to be clear, my background's in environmental science. So I haven't had any training or any official training in business, and I've had to learn on the job. And nobody needs an expert. I'm still learning every single day because, of course, the trends change. But we were very fortunate. I was very unfortunate to have a marketing guru on the team, who Sadi Allen, who's the CEO of our company and was the marketing director for Flowhive. So he was able to come in with a lot of that experience. And some of the lessons that he has shared with me is to really listen to your customers, who you're trying to serve, and find ways to connect with them, but not only connect with them, but to be able to listen. And when they give you feedback, don't freak out. That's actually great. They're speaking to you, negative or positive. Use that feedback as quickly as you can to be able to change what you're doing, if enough of them speak out. So that's a successful startup, is being able to get the feedback and able to adapt to it quickly enough. And that's why small, nimble teams are really really important. Well, not important is the wrong word, but really quick at delivering results. Just because you've just got to act really quickly and roll with the punches, have fun, get excited. And there's been tears in my journey, but there's also been celebrations. So it's a huge roller coaster. There's so much to learn, and there's so many resources out there. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's I'm sure you would have a different experience and maybe similar in that, the roller coaster journey, but it's really just try it, just go for it.
I love the way that you've articulated that in regards that, you know, the small, nimble team can create those feedback loops and get stuff done really quick without the red tape of middle management. And we've got to put this to the board and we need votes on this. Like all that red tape really slows a business to quick launch and get started. And you don't need to be an expert. You know, there's so much access to information and working models. And we live in a world where you can just copy, paste, or take inspiration. You know, you don't have to copy and paste everything, but, you know, and find people in the ecosystem who have done it before. You know, the fact that your CEO has been through a Kickstarter, and maybe Kickstarter is not the right answer, but listening. I think that was your number one point there, is listening to that feedback loop, good or bad. You know, there's a lot of magic in the bad feedback.
And that's farming or gardening in a nutshell as well. Like I feel like a lot of these principles can be applied in the garden, in nature. It's like, okay, I didn't grow potatoes well this year. What happened? What was the feedback it gave me? Soil wasn't right. Maybe I didn't plant in the right spot. Maybe I need to use other companion plants, but we're constantly learning, and applying that same philosophy to business is just, I think it's the way to not get too frustrated with yourself, because you're going to make mistakes. As I said, there's been a lot of tears and a lot of celebrations with us. And anytime that I get frustrated with myself, I have to take a step back. I do have to do this regularly. I read an article on food waste and the bigger problem, and then dive back into the everyday problems and feedback that I need to work through.
Yeah, I love that. That is just so true with the fact that nature is a great teacher. I've found that in my business world as well. I've learned all these frameworks and I'm like, oh, nature does the same thing. And if we
Yep.
slow down and listen and watch and observe, we can actually learn a lot from that. And talking about education and learning, it seems like that's a big passion of yours. You've mentioned the word several times. It's a massive passion of mine. When people come into your world and they're exploring this world of composting and worm farming and reducing waste and organic matter, what's something that you love teaching people where you just see them like have an aha moment and kind of light up and go, wow, I never knew that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ray. Uh, I think I want to answer this question by taking a step back because, as I said, I come from a science background, and I remember when I was getting into composting, like I just loved pulling apart the science and getting into the nitty gritty. And when I first tried to communicate this with people, they just went to sleep. They got so bored. Yeah, carbon to nitrogen ratio, anaerobic, aerobic, like just talking about all these concepts, just people fell asleep. And especially when dealing with social media, with Instagram or any of the others, it's like giving bite-sized information that is going to appeal to that person in front of you. And I think that's what I mean by listening as well, is being able to give a message that is going to resonate with them. So what I guess how I kind of choose to give the composting message is to look at your worms, is to keep happy worms. What do your worms need to be happy? Okay, they like to be in a damp, dark, and cool environment. They don't want to be really flooded with food there. And so it's just about creating stories, I suppose, and analogies which are similar to our everyday life. Actually, this is probably a cool one I'd like to share with you. I probably borrowed this from some other people, but when I think about soil structure, I think about it as a house itself and the biology, like the glues and the nails, which hold the structure together. And of course, that structure allows you to have windows and plumbing, which of course, the windows is for proper airflow and the plumbing is for water as well. Without that structure, everything just crumbles. And so using those analogies of like, hey, like soil biology are invisible, but imagine if your house had no nails or glue, it would fall apart. That's what these invisible guys are doing. So yeah, that's where I like to get a bit creative and have fun with it.
I love that. That is such a great analogy. I could picture it, the house collapsing, and that's what we're doing to the soils, and I couldn't agree with you more. I've sat in rooms, I've watched videos and people pronouncing words with silent X's and Y's. And I'm just like looking around in the room going, you've lost the whole audience. Like no one is following what you're talking about. And I think reading the room as a feedback and knowing your audience and who you're speaking to is a huge factor when educating. And so, showing how smart you are doesn't necessarily mean that everyone gets the aha moment that they need. So I think there's going to be a lot of people listening to this, imagining their house collapsing and now replacing that with soil and worms and biology.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't mean build with soil and microbes. Don't get that confused. But yes, it's really cool to see that when people have that penny drop and realize like, and it might take a few, but it's okay. It's about having fun along the way.
Yeah. Love that. Soil lovers, you've been listening to Regen Ray and Peter. He's got an amazing t-shirt and we're going to ask him what that means just after this quick break. Welcome back, soil lovers. You're hanging out with Regen Ray and Peter from Subpod. Peter, you have some inspiring words on your t-shirt and I've noticed it. And if you're following along on the video version on the Soil Learning Center, you're going to see it. But if not, Pete, what does it say?
Yeah, it says feed the soil, feed the world. And it's been the Subpod motto since day one. The whole reason we chose these words to represent us is that humans have such a deep connection with plants. We use them for our food, for our medicine, for our mental health, but we often forget about what is actually feeding the plants, the soil. So with the Subpod and the community and our whole mission is to remember that the soil is a living ecosystem. And then when we take care of it, we're actually taking care of everything that sprouts from it and all the chain reactions that happen from there. So our number one mission and motto is to feed the soil. And in doing this, we hope that feeds the world.
Love that. And have you seen that narrative change over the years? How long have you been doing what you're doing, and has that narrative changed?
Yeah, it's changed massively up here. I, I graduated about, terrible years, probably about 8 years ago. And I actually got a job straight off the bat as a soil scientist and was fired 3 months afterwards. And kind of like ended up in a forest and was pretty depressed for a little bit because I thought that was going to be my trajectory to do something great. And from there, I realized that I wanted to connect with gardening and permaculture. So I've been from that journey there. That was about 8 years ago. And I got stuck into soils about 5 years ago. So 3 years after that. And from the time I got up here, I'm living in Byron Bay right now, but not for too much longer. There has always been a huge regenerative community here, but I've seen it grow significantly. I regularly go to the farm, and there's a patch there which I love, living agroecology, which is run by women farmers in their 30s, and they're just so knowledgeable, so lovely, tender, and caring. They can work harder than me, and I don't know how much that's changed in the last 5 years, but it seems like that community is thriving. So I can only speak for Byron here, but I'm sure that in some ways it's a bit of a microcosm for other communities out there too.
Yeah. And if not, I think Byron probably ahead of the curve in regards to these movements and connectivity. And I know a lot of people want to create the Byron Bay of Victoria or the Byron Bay of, other states and parts of the world. And so it has that kind of branding of very, very, nice living and wholesome and connectivity and calm and so forth. And that's the marketing side of it. I don't know if it's true, if you actually
smoke and mirrors. Yeah.
All well aware of marketing. But that's what people aspire to, being connected and living in a much more simpler kind of lifestyle and that connectivity from paddock to plate, knowing where the food source comes from, knowing the farmer's name, what's their family like, and that it all starts at feeding the soil, and if we get that right, everything above the ground kind of falls into place very, very holistically in some shape, way or form.
Absolutely. That's right. I think that's been the coolest thing to witness is that people in their 30s and their 20s are getting into this at a young age. And as you would know, and you've probably shared this many times, is the average age farmer in Australia, it's about 55 or 65?
Yep, it's around the 60 mark, yeah, from what I hear and see, yeah.
That's right. And we have this huge revolution, or just a new wave of young farmers getting involved, getting their hands dirty, enjoying it. And it's a cultural shift. And that's what I like. I like to compare these kind of cultural shifts with what happens in fashion. You all of a sudden you see a certain amount of people wearing a type of shoe, and there's a critical mass, and then it really just explodes. And it's the same with farming. Like, we like to think that we're ahead of we don't do things for status and because it's not cool, but a big part of us does, I think, and we're all kind of driven subconsciously by that. And it's really cool to see that happen in the farming community.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the regenerative movement that's happening in Byron Bay, and I'm seeing signals of that everywhere. And you just have to do a Google Trends search and see the trends of regenerative outdo everything else. So I want to know, what does the word regenerative mean for you?
Regeneration. Wow. I want to give you like some word definition for it, but that wouldn't do it justice. When I think of regeneration, it's just me being in a forest, and that forest there continually exists on its own. It can respond to challenges. It can adapt to anything around it, and it has everything it needs to support itself. So that's kind of the feeling I get when I think about regenerative. It's being in a forest and it's watching those ecosystems take care of each other and really be able to grow without taking from anybody else.
I love that. I love how you brought it back to yourself, because to me, I'm a big advocate of regenerative starts with the soul and the person.
Mm.
If you have a regenerative mindset, a regenerative soul, you just see the whole landscape and the world from a different point of view. You heal opposed to doing harm. And you just took me into a place of like standing in a forest and seeing it in its beauty and stillness, and it's alive. There's so much life there. And I think that is a great place to take that question, because it is unique to everyone. That's why I ask it. But it's not just about the principles or what you're doing on the paddock or what you're doing, on the land. It's really about that place of zen and calmness, but appreciative that it's evolving and changing. And you gave me goosebumps as you explaining that. So I appreciate you taking me in that journey.
You're welcome. Yeah, another thing came to me, which is a bit more textbook, but one of my teachers, permaculture teacher up here, Banya, he often explains it with a spiral going up. And I love that concept as well. It's like sustainable is just a circle. It's just like we're completing one round, we start again. But regenerative, it's like, no, we're going upwards. It's a third dimension.
Mm.
And so for the soil lovers out there, like if you want a bit less woo-woo, that might be a better definition.
We're all in for the woo-woo. I say that to all the guests is we go woo-woo, we're hitting the nail on the head, because that's what we need to be more acceptance of, is that it's okay to, I always say if someone has to label you woo-woo, that's because they don't know how to understand and you in a box, and that's their problem, not your problem. So
I love that.
Awesome. So you've touched on a lot of different ground, and I know you don't want to probably talk about your product a lot because you live and breathe it every day and it's a bit normal for you, but I think it's quite extraordinary what you've done. I want to touch on one principle, because what I love about your product is that it's connected to the ground. And for the soil lovers who aren't aware of it, and maybe you do a better job, but you've mentioned it as like a box that what I like is that it has holes, so the worm colonies can come in and out of what you've created, which is very different to some other compost systems that may sit above the ground, or I have a compost worm farm that's sitting on level 21 in the sky and not connected to the ground at all. But that's the best I can do. And so I'm grateful that I have that ability to do that. And that's to give permission to everyone to do something rather than nothing. But love that your product is connected to the ground and has that energy in the mycelium network and the vibration and the energy connected. So why did you decide to make your product so connected to the earth?
Oh, it has so many benefits, allowing the worms and microbes to venture out of the subpod. It makes the system so much more forgiving. Say if you add in too much food waste, too much nitrogen, and the temperature rises up, which has happened with me recently. Temperature went up to about 35 Celsius, which is, what is that in Fahrenheit? Sorry, I can't do the maths, about 90 for any Americans. And that was about for 3 days. And of course, composting worms don't like temperatures roughly over 28 Celsius. So the worms move out of the system and allows them to have more space. They can move out of the system. And this, I think, is like, if you're in a house and you have no air conditioner and you have no door, you're going to really suffer. And I don't like to poo-poo any of the other worm farms out there, but that's kind of what it represents. The worms don't have a way to get outside of the system. The worms can leave. They leave, system cools down, they'll come back in and eat the microbes. So that's one reason that it allows the system to be a lot more forgiving. The second one, you've already touched on it. It allows the plants to be able to connect with the soil and the compost and the microorganisms happening within Subpod. So for soil lovers out there, probably well aware that a lot of plants produce exudates. Those exudates feed the microorganisms. And because the Subpod there is just a thriving ecology, it allows a lot of those microbes to play and interact with the plants around them. So we just have amazing stories and results from these plants being so much more resilient and healthy and requiring much less water, just because they are fed consistently from the Subpod around them. So those are the two main reasons. It's more forgiving, it's more resilient, the system, and allows the worms and the microbes to feed the plants directly. It's very simple. When people said like, oh, why didn't I think of that? It's very simple. And it's funny because it took about 8 years to design and make. It was invented by an artist, Andrew Haim DeVries, who's in Perth. It came over here and a bunch of us got involved. But it took 8 years for him to come up with it.
Wow. So it wasn't an overnight success like everyone says things happen
No,
on.
never is.
Never
It
is.
never. Maybe the idea came to him quickly, but the actual execution of producing the product and kickstarting and the funding and everything, it was $200,000 around that just for the mold itself. So yeah, it was quite a very expensive endeavor just to get the mold.
Yeah, I love that. And so grateful for platforms and this whole new, crowdfunding way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
People will give money and wait for the product to be finished, and delayed gratification. Teaching people to be patient and give money and wait for everything to unfold. And you don't have to get investors involved and maybe you have hidden agendas and whatnot, so a magical time that we kind of live in, where we can ask for other people's money and they give and then also receive, so it's very, very fun.
Well said. Yeah, it's a beautiful system. Like, it's really thankful for those first initial people to back us and support us. But how great is that? People can take a leap with other people and get that community beforehand. So well said, Ray.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see that transfer into like the growing and selling of food model as well. Very big in America with CSAs or community supported agriculture. But I want to see that trend take off here in Australia, where you actually invest in the farmer and the yield together, not just expect a subscription box of 20 kilos of X, So being all in it together, I think, is a real magical way of taking the reward and the risk wholesomely together.
So do I. I would love to see more of that. And I would love to see more support and help for farmers, because yes, we can do it all. As you said, we can be generalists and find ways to be digital savvy, but being a farmer, spending so much time out there in the fields, probably the last thing you want to do is jump on Instagram, make a website and design all this. I'd love to see more support out there to really be the middleman and help farmers design these processes. So any soil lovers out there,
we're seeing that innovation, especially during COVID. There was a big,
cool.
It was interrupted. The farmers market stopped. Farmers had to innovate. And it also made farmers realize how hard marketing was, or having farm gates set up and selling directly to buyers is a bit more difficult, and it took them away from innovating in the shed or planting their next season. So, people created websites and e-commerce platforms. So lots of innovation happening. So I love seeing that kind of happen, and the community solving those problems, and co-ops, people bringing all their food to a co-op shed and then distributing from that also was increased. And people realizing that you can buy directly from a farmer. Like, that was a bit of a mind-blowing experience for people when there was food shortages and empty shelves in supermarkets.
Yeah,
people were like,
that's it.
Oh, buy directly from the farmer?
Wait, this comes from a farm, not a factory? Yeah, that's right. I love that. And there's so many people that I've had conversations with that have been inspired by growing their own food. Just a herb, just a lettuce. And from there, recognizing how much effort it can take sometimes to grow something, and really started to respect and have compassion and more support for those local farmers. So it's just amazing, those ripple effects that can happen by just growing your own food.
Yep, 100%. I was saying the same thing to someone yesterday about people growing carrots and going, wow, carrots are so hard to grow. How do they sell a bag of 10 for $1? Like, that's not fair. I'm like, yeah, and now you realize, what's actually happening behind the scenes. So the challenge of growing during COVID really highlighted how much we're not paying for food, or how little it's priced. So I think there's a lot of aha moments, and maybe this was, the wake up call or the shake up that we all kind of needed, and changing that kind of cultural shift. And, I grew up in a bit of a retro suburbia kind of environment, being European, Italian settlers, there was no grass. It was just veggie patch. And I've made videos on YouTube about it and taken people through tours. So having a compost bin or a section of the yard where you just threw all the clippings and all the, chop and drop stuff was normal for me. I didn't realize that it was such a out of the norm environment. So how do we create that culture shift around composting and, growing our own food and having compost. People see compost as like smelly, dirty, worms, bugs, insects, rotting, mold. So it has a bit of negative connotation to it. But how do we change that cultural shift?
It's funny because as you were saying that story, it's like it's gone full circle. Our grandparents did it because it just made sense. Like recycle, put those nutrients back into the soil so we can grow more food. But all of a sudden, we've lost that incentive and need to grow food and maybe that passion and love. Then there's no point for the composting. So even if you aren't growing your own food, of course, the climate change reason comes in there. And for the soil lovers out there, I'm sure they're well versed on when food waste goes to landfill, produces methane, 20 to 30 times more potent than CO2. So it's a big part of that is educating people on the impacts of food waste going to landfill. That's number one. But how you do that is really the critical part here. Because again, if we do that in a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, then it's going to turn people off. So creating that culture is about, hey, look, guys, there's this really big problem, but it's actually a really big solution because all this food waste can turn into compost. So you can use that for soil and food. And it's like, wow, what just happened? You guys just took a linear model and turned it into a circular model. So I think that's what we need to do. And there's lots of companies out there, they're doing it, and we're doing our little piece of the puzzle here. It's really just telling people out there that you can do it. Those challenges that you have out there, mold, with rats, with the smells, with anything out there that turns you off composting, there's actually someone out there that looks exactly like you, has the same problems, and is now a compost champion. Yeah, come and have a look at them. So that's I guess what I mean when I'm like trying to stretch the boundaries and find people that probably are very similar to you that are doing it.
Oh, I love that. Compost champion. That's definitely something that I'd love to, badge of honor to wear. What a great way to identify as. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that is definitely, the culture shift that needs to happen. And you're right. It blows my mind that people would remove that organic matter that could add fertility to the ground and then go and buy fertilizers to put that fertility that they just took off. It's like, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. And it's simply what I see a lot of people out there just aren't aware. We've missed a generation. Like our grandparents are doing it. Maybe our parents weren't. I'm talking in this case, my age, probably different for everyone listening. But living compost is just so much more potent and higher quality than anything you can buy in the shops. When you buy compost from the shops, it goes through a pasteurization process. They have to heat it up, kill all the pathogens. It also kills off all the beneficial microbes. So you're far better off by making your own compost. Even a little bit can go such a long way. So yes, if you're into gardening, like making your home compost is 101, and it can be easier than what you think.
Love that. What a perfect note to wrap this interview up. Are you ready to be the voice of our soils, Peter?
I'm a little bit nervous, but yes, I'll try my best.
Awesome. Let's do this. If you could become the soil and embody its energy and be its voice, what would you say to us on Earth?
I just got a really dark image in my head, but because this. All right, if I'm embodying the soil, you will all end up with me, and you will all begin with me as well. So by treating me with love and care, and another word to be able to, what can I say here? And compassion, really. By treating me with love and care and compassion, you can really, really, you're only helping yourself. That was a bit long-winded.
No, I love that. Great words there. Love, compassion, and you start with me and you end with me. Like, I think that's a real important part to identify, so what we do with it during our time will make or break us, and I think it's very, very important to sit with that. So thank you for being the voice of our soils.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking the question, and thank you all the soil lovers out there that are listening today. Really, really appreciate your time. And yeah, I hope you're all composting out there. And if you're not, then I hope you're a little bit intrigued and you'll give it a go.
Absolutely. That's the best we can ask for, is to plant that little seed and open up that curiosity and, make your own pathways to dig deeper. Peter, how can people hang out with you more and find out more about your amazing product, Subpod?
So if you are on social media, you can jump on to Subpod just on Instagram, or on Facebook, where we're most active on Instagram, or you can jump online to our website. It's just subpod.com. And for our online community, it's thegrowhub.subpod.com. And that will take you to the community of subpodders and composters. And we're constantly sharing things there.
Love that. All those links will be around the video if you're watching on the Soil Learning Center or around your favorite podcast platform. I have to say, I've been a follower of yours for a very long time. I loved all your videos going out in the garden. You're making demo videos on your Instagram. It's really educational. So I recommend everyone go out there and have a look at the product and see it working. And you've done an amazing job to really show how, simple this mindset shift can be. And kudos to you and the team for connecting it to the ground, because that's definitely near and dear for me.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, soil lovers, that's been another episode where we've got our hands dirty and digging deeper into the wonderful world of soils. Make sure that you're liking this podcast and sharing it with all your friends, family, and people that you know, because without soils, as you've heard here today, it is the foundation of the house that we need to build. So get outside, get into the sun, get your hands dirty, become a compost champion, and regenerate our soils. Until next time, I'm Regen Ray. Well, soil lovers, that's enough secrets for one episode. I really hope that you enjoyed all the secrets shared during this conversation. But hey, let's not keep it a secret. Please share this podcast around and make sure that you like it and leave us a review, because that really helps spread the secrets of the soil. Until next time, remember, get outside, get your hands dirty, and keep digging deeper into your soils.